Testing. Can everybody hear me? Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you and welcome. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Little housekeeping before we get started. Please silence or turn off your phones. Bathrooms are right down there through the hall. We have a number of handouts and stuff if you had a chance to look at them. If not, we'll have some time for that later. If there's a topic that you wanted to know more about and we don't have something, reach out to me. I have so many I couldn't choose today. I had to limit myself. We also have a book giveaway, so we have a couple books to give away. So you feel free to write your name on a pink card, fold it, and there's a little bowl over there. Allie's going to give her presentation, and then she will be joined by members of the Stow Police Department. So Chief Salisi and Jason, Detector, sorry. We are recording the presentation, so the part of that Allie's doing will be shown on Stow TV. We're not going to be recording the Q&A, so we'll have some time after the presentation for some questions. Open it up. There's a card on the chair. If you want to write the question down, we can collect them and I can read them, or you're welcome just to ask them out loud as well. I'd like to thank Tina from the Randall Library, Chief Salisi, Jonathan from Stow TV, and Jackie and Cindy who helped with organizing this event. I'm a mom in town, so I've been here since 2016. My daughter goes to a local Montessori school, and I'm really passionate about this topic, really passionate about preserving kind of the magic of childhood and adolescence in a world that's increasingly being shaped by big tech. So whether it's encouraging families to delay or helping those who have to, who've already made that choice, I'm really interested to help protect kids and work with parents and support you. I've been doing some work with the state legislators on phone-free schools legislation. So that's coming in Massachusetts. But tonight, just really interested to get the conversation started here and hope that this can be a place that we can support each other and the beginning of a community conversation, but certainly not the end. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker. So Allie is a double board certified psychiatrist specializing in child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry. She's got decades of experience. She's an expert in pediatric anxiety, ADHD, and learning disorders, as well as adolescent mood disorders and reproductive psychiatry. Currently, she's on the faculty at Mass General and Harvard Medical School, working in the Center for Women's Mental Health and supervising physicians. She's been doing this presentation all over. I had the privilege to meet Allie, oh my gosh, it's probably been like a year or so, because she did this presentation in Arlington and we got connected that way. She recently did an event in Northampton. She's been presenting at the Working Mom Summit in Boston. She's been everywhere. So we know you're incredibly busy and we really appreciate you taking the time out to come to Stow. And so I'm going to turn it over to Allie. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Jennifer, for the warm welcome. And this is a really nice, intimate group tonight, so welcome.
I hope everyone can get cozy and relaxed. I might keep my cats on for just a little bit.
These lovely May New England temps. So we're here to talk about how you in Stow, in your beautiful town, it was so green. I really enjoyed driving here. It felt like a departure. I left clinic in the city and then got here and it was like my blood pressure went down. It was really special. So I echo Jennifer's sentiment about wanting to preserve and protect that. You all moved here for a specific reason, I imagine, and one that had to do with not necessarily being so proximate to the hustle and bustle of all of the distractions and busyness of modern life. And so whatever I can do to support that effort, I'm happy to do so. And I think it's a testament to have this many people come out on a very rainy, miserable Tuesday night, that as parents and caregivers, what you want to be doing, and young people, I'm so glad to have young people in the audience, we all want to be doing what we can to give our children the very best possible foundation for learning, for growth and for emotional well-being. And so tonight we'll dive into the way in which the pull of digital tech and how it shapes our children's brains, and more importantly, what we can do about it. I also want to state, because I think the more I've been giving these talks, the more I've felt comfortable being more nuanced about it, that not all screens are the same. So this is not an anti-screen time talk. And a smartphone in a child's pocket throughout the school day, through sports, through family dinner, into homework time, into the bedroom, that's a very different phenomenon than family movie night. And passive watching is very different from interactive engagement. And recreational use is not necessarily the same as educational use. So there are these nuances that I really wanted to clarify. And my core message remains that our kids, and we, by the way, need time in nature. We need time in play. We need time in real community with one another, with our friends and with our families. And this is how they and we build and or sustain our attention, our creativity, our resilience, and our deep relationships. And so tonight, as parents and caregivers, I want you to think about your role, not just about like, how do I manage these screens and limiting them, but also making space for the things that truly help your children and help you and your community members thrive. So let's dive in. So a little bit about me. Jennifer gave a very generous introduction. So I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm also a perinatal psychiatrist. So a hat that I wear is at the Center for Women's Mental Health, where I see women and families in consultation with all kinds of sort of questions psychiatrically with respect to, for example, is their medicine safe in pregnancy or breastfeeding? What about mood and or other changes that cycle with their menstrual cycle, and also sort of mood and cognitive changes across the perimenopause. So that's one role, but really I sort of think about, I spend all day, every day with moms, moms in my clinic at MGH, moms in my life as being a mom to 3 amazing children, moms and parents and caregivers, and parents of the kids and the teens and the college kids in my clinic. I'm also a medical advisor to a group called Wait Until 8th. And this, if you haven't heard of it, is a grassroots organization that empowers parents to come together to delay giving their children a smartphone until at least the end of 8th grade. And it was started by a mom named Brooke Shannon. She lives in Texas. And the spirit of the pledge is that it's hard to delay in modern life in the presence of a lot of peer pressure and a lot of misinformation when kids come home and say everybody else has one, or they might reach a developmental milestone where they can go into town and venture more independently after school, and the feeling or fear that you have to give your child a device so that they remain, quote, safe. The reality is that we've been doing this for a long time without devices. And as I had the pleasure of chatting with your amazing police department earlier, these are safe times, and you live in this town where you have an amazing PD, and these sort of rare but serious events loom large in our minds and shape a lot of our decision making, when in fact, like, the day to day is, it's not really relevant, and yet we're making these choices to give our kids these devices that have actually a lot of impact, like a lot more likelihood of impacting their capacity for attention, for social skills, for basic getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise. But we sort of underweight that because it's not as kind of horrific or catastrophic in terms of the way in which we think about it. So my background, as Jennifer said, is in pediatric anxiety disorders and maternal mental health. And I think that has led to me being very interested in this topic and trying to go community to community, to sort of seed communities one at a time, to really think about the way in which smartphones and the tech can really play quite a role both in perpetuating and maintaining anxiety or accommodating anxiety, both parental and children's anxiety. And it's often a driving force behind many decisions, as I said, in terms of parents and caregivers giving their children tech earlier than they want them to. So I've sort of alluded to this, but tonight, a couple key concepts. When I say smart device, what I really mean is unrestricted access to the internet, social media, and apps. And that's very different from low-tech devices or a screen that is not internet enabled. So this is not a screen time conversation per se. And I also want to make the point that I'm not anti-tech and that tech is a marvel. And the internet is one of the most powerful resources ever invented. And it improves much of my life when I'm using it and it's not using me, in terms of the ways in which it can save time and be used as an intentional tool. But what I'm focusing on tonight is the way in which constant connection brought about by smartphones and other smart related devices has created a situation where kids, and let's face it, where we have essentially trained ourselves to multitask on digital devices, which creates this cognitive strain, increases our distraction, and really increases learning challenges at best, but also contributes to mental health disorders at worst. Okay, so let's go. To put you in the right frame of mind, I want you to imagine brain cells or kind of growing neuroplasticity. And think of the brain like origami paper. My son really likes to fold paper and can make all kinds of amazing shapes and objects. So that's where I got this idea. But, if you think about the brain like a fresh sheet of origami paper, and it's smooth and open and full of potential in terms of all the different folds that a child can make, as a child is growing and experiencing the world, the brain begins to fold just like that piece of paper. And each interaction, each challenge, each habit, each thing that they spend a lot of time doing leaves a crease, leaves an impression in that paper. And these folds are not random, right? So they are shaped by what the brain does most often. In neuroscience, we have an expression that says neurons that fire together, wire together. So the more a young person repeats a thought pattern or repeats an emotional response or an action, the more deeply that fold will be creased. So this is where it gets interesting and also concerning with respect to these smart devices and smart watches, iPads, and other portable tech that have become these powerful sculpting tools. And not because kids are lazy or because screens are inherently evil, but because these devices are always there and they're always the preferred sort of activity or object that is reached for, even sort of without even thinking about it. When you leave a class or you leave an event, or before I opened up my laptop, I kind of just go to pat my pocket. It's this habitual response that we have created, and that's by design. These devices are designed to be irresistible, to keep both us and our children coming back again and again. And that constant connectivity really starts to create these deep automatic folds in the paper. And these folds might look like, as I said, sort of a reflexive reach for distraction in a moment of boredom. Like I have to check myself if I'm waiting on the line at the post office or going to a medical appointment and you have a long elevator ride. There's often, or at least speaking from my experience, I'll reflexively reach for a distraction instead of just kind of stand there and look at people. Or like riding the T, or I did all my training in New York City. Like a lot of really interesting learning and social connection happens on the subway. Looking at people, listening to music, studying them, daydreaming, taking a nap. It rarely happens anymore. These folds also might look like a decreased tolerance for frustration and delayed gratification in our kids and us. These folds might look like a growing discomfort that our kids have with social interactions face to face. And that's often used as a reason why. Parents will say, well, they're anxious or social skills are hard for them, or what are they going to do? They don't have anybody to talk to in the cafeteria. And this is a lifeline. These are comments and stories. And again, no judgment. I'm sort of collecting all these experiences and realizing that it makes sense. They are designed to be incredibly alluring, and these folds become really significant, such that when you do have to sit with discomfort in an awkward social encounter, which is sort of like a hallmark feature of being an adolescent, when you look at your phone, you escape the discomfort, and so that gets highly reinforced. But what gets lost is like the learning that actually it's going to be awkward, and it's still awkward, and then it's over, and you managed. And then you're going to maybe try it a little differently the next time. And I really think about school as this unique place for kids to learn how to do that, and they're increasingly have fewer opportunities to do so. And then, I think another way in which this fold might show up is a fragmented attention span that makes focused learning feel unnatural. And there's a lot of data showing how just sort of population-wide, we are much less able to pay attention, to do deep work, to tolerate sort of a long period without activity, to sustain focus. And I think that's concerning. And I think we should be, if for no other reason, if that's the one piece that sticks with you tonight and kind of gets into your head, like your life is what you pay attention to. And so if our attention is compromised, then that's sort of our lives are compromised. So this is sort of restating the brain like a sheet of origami paper. And I guess my point being, like, here's the kicker. Once the origami paper is folded, I've learned from my son trying to show me how to make a crane versus like this cool little water balloon sort of boat thing. It's nearly impossible to make it perfectly flat again after you've sort of worn those creases in. You can refold it, but the earlier and more often the folds are made, the more they shape the final structure. And this is why childhood and adolescence in particular are so critical, because the brain is still flexible. And this is what we call neuroplastic. And it's also exquisitely sensitive to what it is practicing. So when we hand a child a device that will nudge them toward constant checking, towards social comparison, towards avoidance of discomfort, we're not just giving them a tool, but we're actually giving them a folding pattern. And it shapes who they become. So let's make sure that these folds are intentional, meaningful, and developmentally supportive, and not just sort of automatic reactions to a ping or a habit that has been formed. In terms of other impacts, this one's alarming. Rates of myopia, nearsightedness, have skyrocketed worldwide, with projections estimating that by 2050, half of the global population will be myopic or short-sighted, nearsighted rather. And so I've asked colleagues in ophthalmology, and they said this is absolutely true. This is not sort of fake news. This is legitimate. And it's reflected in the academic literature that this surge is not just about genetics, but it's a clear signal of how lifestyle and environment are shaping young eyes. And one of the most powerful protective factors we have to combat nearsightedness is time spent outdoors. So the more time spent outdoors, which is why like our grandmothers said, get outside, put a jacket on, just get out there. That is 2 hours a day outside significantly reduces the risk of developing myopia, because natural sunlight and long distance visual focus, as opposed to short distance, helps regulate your eye growth. And these are essential developmental experiences. So how do you reckon that with today's averages for kids of 7 to 10 hours a day on screens? Mostly inside, often focused just inches from their face. And it's not just phones, it's watches, tablets, laptops. It's all part of this visual squeeze. And I'm happy to share the papers. I've cited one here from the Lancet. But the sort of prescription is get outside for all of us. So takeaways from tonight's talk are that our kids need more free play, more independence, and more sleep. That modern parenting is very difficult and much easier to do as a connected community. So I'm so pleased that you all are out tonight and hopefully have met at least one new person or can spread the word and grow it. And that mentally healthier parents make mentally healthier children. So just sort of speaking plainly about how parental anxiety is a significant reason why our kids are getting smartphones and smart tech earlier than they need them. So we can review just a little science. What does the most up-to-date evidence tell us about how our kids are doing? So distress is on the rise, and this is showing that sort of indicators of poor mental health among U.S., this is in particular for girls and young women, but the data is similar for boys and young men, that rates of sort of what we call in psychiatry internalizing and externalizing disorders were like mostly metastable for a really long period of time. And around 2010, when Apple allowed all wireless carriers to sell the iPhone and sales exploded, there's been a very significant uptick in indicators of poor mental health. One issue that gets debated is this causality or is this correlation? Meaning, is it the smartphone itself that's creating these mental health problems, or is it the fact that, there's so many other things happening at the same time as people having smart devices? And I think we can put that debate to rest because the data is just so compelling kind of either way. If you think about the phone as an experience blocker and think back to 2 hours a day of sunlight for the growing, developing eye, and we don't want myopia. And kids are supposed to be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep, and actually so are we, so that our brains can kind of take out the trash. We don't have a lymphatic system of the brain. The rest of our body does have a lymphatic system. That's how we get rid of garbage, the garbage we eat, the garbage from, the environment, whatever, from our lotions and all that good stuff. But our brains don't have a lymphatic system. Sleep is how we take out the trash. And for any parent or caregiver who's been up all night with a newborn, that feeling. And so then you look at rates of sleep for our youth, and they are poor. And a lot of that is because these devices are in the bedroom. And again, this is not a character flaw or a moral failure of your child or adolescent. It's because these devices are designed that way. And so another goal for tonight is if you can think about if you currently have a device in your bedroom, I would encourage you to trial charging it elsewhere. I'm a fan of the tech drawer in the kitchen, and everybody, parents, child, everybody, all the tech goes into the drawer, ideally around dinner time, so everybody can just have a device-free meal. And I think you'll notice a change of the tone in your home. I think you'll be more present with your family, settle into your evening. And if you do have work that you have to get back to, you'll be more refreshed to sort of tuck it in for the night after you've actually had downtime in real life with your family and loved ones. This data is from a more local source in terms of a youth risk behavior survey that's done through Emerson Hospital. And so it's not coming out so well, but basically showing parents not monitoring cell phone usage in high school, which is really interesting. And I think this is often another sort of pain point that I think a lot of high school administrators and some high schoolers certainly, and their families might say, what am I going to do? Police my kid till they're 18. They have to figure it out somehow. And I think that's true. And I would encourage parents to think about sort of arc of development and think about, for example, driver's ed. We don't sort of throw our hands up and say okay, whatever, they're going to drive someday, so may as well get started now in 8th grade, 7th grade, 6th grade, 3rd grade. We do it when it's developmentally appropriate. And so you don't need to be I think you could do it in a gradual fashion, but you're also in charge and you pay for this device probably. So as parents, you can say, yeah, I'd like to give you some more independence, and we should monitor screen time and your sleep. How are your grades? How are you managing this tech? Is it getting in your way? If so, that's by design. It's not your fault. And let me help put in some more guardrails and parameters around how to do this in a more gradual fashion. And I have found that family systems who do that don't then have this feared end result of a kid who goes to college and goes crazy on their smartphone, because they've learned to love so many other things in life, like reading a book or working out or drawing or painting or crafting or cooking. And again, that origami paper, if that's not getting done, then it's much less likely to start de novo when they're 18-year-old freshmen in the dorm. So I think people sometimes think about this as like, oh, is it like junk food? And if you're very sort of prohibitive, then there's going to be this pendulum swing in the other direction. I just really haven't seen it shake out that way. I think the sort of slow and steady wins the race, but like give them an ample runway to develop and sort of fold that paper for lots of other interests and hobbies and habits that will serve them in health and creativity and a life of meaning and purpose. So I might fly through these since it doesn't show up so great, and I will share slides with Jennifer who can circulate them. But there's a disconnect between sort of perception of time spent also, which I think we can all cop to as well. Have you ever been in the situation where you're like, I'm just going to check directions to your game and then we're going to leave the house? And then my son's like, Mom, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I just had to respond to this one email, and oh, so-and-so texted for the shoes, so I'm going to run upstairs. It's by design. So we have to be accountable as well. And this one's a biggie in terms of electronic devices in the bedroom. So really, none of us should have any of this in the bedroom, because even if they're powered down, even if they're in night mode, there's data that shows the mere presence of the smartphone your brain is going to keep wanting to sort of check in just to see, what if they replied to my message? Maybe they liked my post. And it's impossible versus the sort of true disconnect, unplug, put it in the tech drawer in the kitchen. It's like clocking out. So I think there's real value in that practice. Stress has always been a part of the adolescent experience, but among teenagers today, it's interesting. There was a survey done of grind cultures for US teens, and looked at sort of what teens across the United States are thinking and feeling. And it was a nationally representative sample. So about almost 1,600 teens ages 13 to 17 completed a self-report questionnaire about stress, about burnout, about social media use. And then once they had collected this data, then they had actually a team of 19 additional teens, which I really love, helped the researchers interpret the findings. So I thought this was a very cool process, by the way. It's called co-interpretation, and resulted in some really great and illustrative quotes from our teens. But what kinds of stress are our teens facing? And this sometimes comes up in the sort of counter response that this is not causal, but it's correlation in terms of the smartphones and the mental health epidemic of our youth. Regardless, the smartphones play a role. So the research examines teens' experiences of 6 types of pressure that they clarified that make them feel bad. And 81% of participants reported experiencing at least one type. So here are the kinds that they reported. Game plan, over 50%. The pressure to have your future path, your college, your career, your relationships all figured out. Achievement, the pressure to achieve the most, to be the best. Appearance, the pressure to look a certain way. Social life, the pressure to have an active social life, as is often documented on these devices. Friendship, the pressure to be available and communicating with friends. That's often one that kids will say, like, I would love to not have to be doing this, but it's like almost a maintenance of relationships demand that they feel like responsible, that if they don't get back to someone in time, they're going to be upset with them. And activism, the pressure to be informed and outspoken about issues affecting the community and the world. And I think that, teens report that this is coming from a variety of sources. But, a biggie is social media. Social media for each type of pressure can really contribute to some of these pressures feeling worse. Some adolescents were saying it sometimes made it better in terms of the activism, for example. But I think it's not hard to see how, for example, appearance and social life is so much more amplified through social media. And it's almost this double whammy, because there's this sort of as if quality to the life that is curated and presented on social media. But then there's also seeing things on social media that maybe you're not a part of. And so that only sort of reinforces this feeling of loneliness or isolation or not being enough. So that's a huge theme of what teens will talk about and often say, if everybody else was off of it, I would happily get off of it. And our older, sort of our 20-somethings have definitely sort of reflected back on wishing things were different. And those whose parents sort of held the line and said no, believe me, they come around and say, like, I'm really glad my parents did that. So if that's something you're considering, more power to you. This next sort of sequence of slides, I'll go through fairly quickly just to tell the story of like, how did we get here per Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which it seems like is over there. Maybe that's one of the books you can win. But in summary, he tells a story where he calls a tragedy in 3 acts. But he talks about, similar to the data I showed about in 2010, rates of specifically internalizing disorders going up after a long period of metastability. That not all areas of mental health were impacted. It's the ones that are more likely impacted by these sort of social pressures with respect to what our teens told us about what it feels like to be a teen in modern times. Young people are particularly at risk. So often people will say, well, how could anybody feel well today from a psychiatric perspective? Like, there are so many stressors, financial, environmental, political, just the grind of life. And yet our young people, by sort of significant metrics, are more at risk than other swaths of the population. Then people will talk about, well, is it because we're now up in our kids' business all the time asking, like, how's your mood? Are you sleeping okay? At every pediatric visit, the schools do assessments. But it's not just about self-reporting, but it's also about behaviors. And also not just behaviors in the sense of sort of behaviors that are trivial. These are kids who are being hospitalized at rates that are higher than ever. People often say, this is our country, our great nation, and we're struggling. But it's not just an American problem. This is data that's reflected across many other similar nations, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom. And so the tragedy, Act 1, is what John Haidt talks about, and I support, that the decline of the play-based childhood and the rise of supervision from well-intentioned parents and or anxious parents meant that kids spent a lot more time indoors. And in terms of daily time use, there's screen-based activities, sports, and homework. It's also that grind culture of, like, if you're not doing something as a means to an end, like for a resume or for a chance to make the JV, to then make the varsity, to then, be competitive, and then we shouldn't be putting our time there. So sort of outdoor play and other things just because have gone down, whereas sort of more programming and screen time has gone up. And kids start spending less time with one another. So this slide always makes me feel sad. Meeting up with friends every day has just like plummeted, which some of the best parts of my youth, just meeting up with friends. Like high school, it's like the whole thing. And daily time with friends has gone down. And so this is from a really long-standing study called the Monitoring the Future study from the University of Michigan. In tandem, there's this rise of the phone-based childhood. So the share of U.S. households with specific technology, smartphones and social media platforms are adopted faster than any communication technology before it. So it's not just about like, we had this moral panic over color TV or the radio. This is something unlike any other before it, largely because it crowds out a play-based childhood. And daily social media use goes up such that 80% of 10th graders are using social media nearly every day. This is sort of to show educational scores that there's been a decline over the past decade, particularly in reading, math, and science. And this trend coincides with widespread adoption of smartphones and also educational technology, which I think, while offering potential learning tools, has really contributed to distraction, reduced attention spans, like I was referencing earlier, and less in-depth learning. And studies really do show that excessive screen time and reliance on these digital tools can undermine your capacity to think critically and to focus. So I think it really calls for a more balanced approach to the way in which we're using technology in education. I've referenced this phenomenon. If you think about sort of the phone, is it the phone itself or is it what the phone is getting in the way of? Regardless, it's an experience blocker. And difficult for us as adults to manage, very difficult for our kids to manage. So some statistics: by 2015, 1 in 5 American teen girls using social media as a full-time job. By 2023, actually this number is now over 50% of teens report being online almost all the time. And our kids are not seeing enough of each other. They're not sleeping enough. They have a hard time concentrating, and their origami paper is being folded to prefer screens over so many other potential activities that are good for their development. We've covered this. So smartphones get in the way of social skills developing, sleep loss, attention, and also put people at risk for a lot of difficulty regulating their use beyond just like, I need to keep checking. There is a cohort of people for whom it's, I would call it addiction. There's debate in the field about whether or not we can call it that yet, but we can, I think, agree on can't stop use. I'll just sort of fly through some of these because we've covered a lot of this. This is just an important one to remember, that as much as we like to think we can multitask, we really cannot. We really cannot. And that's because attention acts as a filter. And so it only allows relevant information into conscious awareness. And our brains use an area called the lateral prefrontal cortex to load a rule set. So for any of you who like do computer programming or write code, like there's a rule set, and our brain uses the lateral prefrontal cortex as a rule set for each task, determining what is relevant. And so, hang on. Right, so it can only hold one rule set at a time. So attempting to perform multiple tasks means our brain actually has to switch between rule sets. And this causes real things. It causes task switching cost. You basically lose 0.15 seconds every time you have to swap rule sets. Accuracy issues. So conflicting rule sets cause performance drops. And task switching will shift your memory processing from one part of the brain to another, to the striatum. So then it means that those memories are harder to access later. So no matter sort of how seductive the notion of multitasking is, I think you can put it to rest. We just cannot do it. And so why are we teaching our kids to do that in school? It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever when people say they have to learn how to do this. They're going to have to manage this tech for the duration. My counter response is attention requires a foundation, and that's what school does. You can see here lots of notifications. This is addiction, problematic interactive media use, and a lot of adolescents experience use that is to the level of a psychiatric disorder in terms of gaming addiction, problematic internet use, pornography addiction, or internet addiction, among others. A little humor so we can take a breath. Remember, as parents, we can say, nope, we're just not going to do that. Or if we've done it, we can roll it back. You can say, I went to a talk tonight and the science is changing and we're going to make a change in the way that we're doing this at home. And we'll do it all together. This is not a punishment, but actually an opportunity for our family. So this is the more hopeful part of the talk. And then we'll get to our awesome panel. So what can I do? There's a lot you can do. You're already here. You did it. Coming together as a community, raising the age at which we give our children in your community unfiltered access to the internet, social media, and apps. You can take the pledge. If you want to find other communities, or rather other families who share your values, you can go to waituntil8th.org. You can search by your school and put your child's grade in. This is confidential information, and then you will get a notification once there are at least 10 families in your child's grade who have taken the pledge with you. And that helps, because then when your child says at the holidays or going back to school in August, September, like, I need it and I'm the only one who doesn't have it, you actually have like 9 other kids in their grade that don't have it. And then sort of what you do with that moving forward is kind of up to you. And there are so many neat Wait Until 8th chapters around Massachusetts where they do, like everybody hang out at the playground and order a bunch of pizzas and just like get the kids together. Because remember, we're not just taking away, but we also have to give back opportunity for our kids to connect and play, which is what they really want to be doing. And so it's easier to do that as a community than it is as a parent in isolation. So many states are taking action to reduce phone use in schools. So this is interesting. And it's really interesting because it's happening across the political spectrum. Politicians in red states, politicians in blue states, everybody's enacting fully phone-free, not everybody. A lot of states are enacting fully phone-free policies. And these are being issued at all levels of governance, from governors and legislatures through school districts and individual schools. And it's happening around the world. So just in the past year, countries such as Brazil, Greece, Australia have passed legislation or enacted policies to limit or eliminate smartphone use by their students during the school day. And I just think that's really heartening, like in a divided country and a world of diverse nations, like this is happening quickly. So it really speaks to, I think, what parents and teachers are seeing in terms of their children and their students. You can check out Smartphone Free Childhood. They have tons of resources. There are WhatsApp groups. There are online resources. There's a newsletter, and so much more. I've already mentioned this, but we can advocate for our schools to be smartphone free here in Massachusetts. And there are many that have already enacted smartphone free bell-to-bell policies just here in Massachusetts. Have any of you heard of or seen what a Yonder pouch is? So it's pretty neat. It's like it looks like a sort of just a little pouch or like a sunglasses case or a glasses case. And many schools or also some like theaters or sort of meeting spaces will issue them to individuals to put all their smart tech in a pouch. So you put your phone, your watch, your AirPods, and then it locks. And then it's locked for the day, but it stays with you. And so kids can put it in the pouch and then put it in their locker, put it in their backpack, ideally power down. And it just makes it's sort of like the tech drawer in the kitchen. It's like that barrier to not doing that reflexive checking. And the sort of feedback is that the rollout is actually pretty seamless. And many schools have just said, like, we're going to do this because we want to recapture community. We want like a noisy lunchroom. We want kids playing cards or, yelling and hooting and hollering. And maybe that on the one hand feels chaotic, but on the other hand, that's childhood. And I've heard going from school to school that so many positive stories of just like kids are kids again. They're like playing Foursquare. They're throwing a ball around. They're looking at each other. They're not bumping into each other in the halls because their eyes are up as opposed to like buried in their device. This quote really just gets me. This is from a librarian where after a week of Yonder in her school, she said, "We've had more books checked out in 1 week than the entirety of last year." So that's just amazing. Phone-free schools also improve learning and test scores. And if we can't get behind the mental health benefits, like I feel like we can get behind wanting our kids to have good education. When I hear the argument that, well, kids should regulate their own devices because that's the real world, I think it's not a developmentally appropriate argument. It's overlooking this critical truth that I've alluded to over and over again, that regulation requires a foundation. So developing self-control and attention and critical thinking is not innate. It is cultivated through experiences that allow for focus and deep learning and genuine human interaction. And so when we remove these distractions during these critical developmental years, we're giving our kids the opportunity to build these skills. And school is a protected day where that can really happen. You can develop a family media plan. So I would say prioritize in-person connection, screen-free meals at a minimum. One screen at a time is a nice rule I like, just because sometimes you can see like you got your phone and the tablet and your laptop and the TV's going in the background and your watch. Charge tech in a central location. So we have the tech drawer in our kitchen. Absolutely no devices in the bedroom. You can get an old school alarm clock. You can order one from Amazon. It'll be here by 10 p.m. Exercise and play every day, ideally outside. There are tools that exist. You can create a family media plan. You can establish a firewall. You can set Apple parental controls. So there are lots of tools, but by far the easiest thing to do is just delay. Because this is a lot of management and work, and I'm not tech savvy. We got to use our phones less. We are modeling this behavior. We have to take the plunge along with our kids. I said this before and I really stand by it. Your life is what you pay attention to. So if you're paying attention to the notifications in your email and your text, because again, not because you're a checked out parent, but because it's by design, then this is a nice opportunity for you to reframe using tech as a tool and then staying accountable. If you want support to change your phone habits, there is a great book that's called How to Break Up with Your Phone by Catherine Price, and is really comprehensive. Maybe that's one of the other books that's up for grabs. No, sorry. False advertising. We can learn and practice new skills. So I mentioned at the start of my talk that a lot of what the maintainer of, I think, tech giving to our younger generation is parental anxiety. And actually, that's really treatable. We can really treat our own anxiety. We've got great both psychotherapies and medication for adult anxiety. If your child is anxious, often child and adolescent psychiatrists will say, first, what's happening in terms of how everybody's responding to the anxiety. And one of the gold standards of pediatric anxiety treatment is helping parents realize the ways in which, or the environment, not just the parents, but all of us, are inadvertently accommodating the anxiety through something called avoidance coping. And so when you get yourself skilled up and realize that, like, if the child is distressed because there's a socially anxious and socially awkward moment, and we like swoop in, that is accommodation, and we can learn to ride the wave of our own distress, because that cringy moment in the cafeteria it's fleeting, and they're gonna figure it out. But not if we don't let them. I've stated this enough. The big myth: smartphones help anxious kids. They really don't. Even if, for example, your child's in a psychotherapy, and part of the psychotherapy, someone mentioned this on a call earlier today, where it's like, well, they need to be able to access or text for coaching, skills coaching in a particular domain of psychotherapy. I still think that they could do that by accessing, for example, a counselor at the school and say, part of my treatment plan is that I can access my coach for a skills coaching. I was speaking with a school counselor at an independent school. She's like, absolutely. That's what I'm here for. Please come to me. Not because I'm going to tell you what to do, but I can facilitate that connection. But not just like solo with your phone in the pocket. The other thing is we have to sort of rebrand anxiety as normal and necessary, not pathologic anxiety, but that like anxiety really helps us grow. It really is a natural part of child development. And it helps us learn how to cope with challenges. So when we let our kids face manageable stressors without digital intervention, they can really have resilience and emotional growth be fostered. School is a practice ground for life. They learn social skills, and they have the ability to connect with other people in a real world way that is hard to do outside of the school day. I've just gone through how avoidance makes anxiety worse, but this is sort of the cycle of avoidance coping mechanisms. And sort of the punchline is, the more kids avoid distress, or this goes for all of us, by the way, the more we avoid distress, the more powerful the fear becomes. I once treated this adorable little 5-year-old who basically looked at me and she's like, so you're telling me to face my fears? I was like, kind of, with, in a manageable way and through coaching. But yes. And in terms of the evidence, some studies suggest that banning smartphones doesn't significantly reduce student anxiety. That's often one that we hear. But my counterpoint is that I don't think we're interpreting that exactly right, that like absence of evidence is not evidence of absence of effect. I think those short-term studies miss long-term growth, and also we're measuring the wrong things. People might still say, yes, I feel anxious, but we're not asking them, do you feel that you can solve problems more effectively? Do you feel more independent? Do you feel like longer term, you're more adaptable? You might still feel anxious. It may never be your favorite. That's okay. And big picture, we can really give our kids some freedom. So maybe this is a great place for me to end, which is to say that our need to monitor via smartphone can really undermine our adolescents' development of autonomy and self-regulation. And I think in this town, I was just learning that in this town, you can walk from home or walk from school through the woods to get to your after-school job back in the day, and that the kids can roam and free range. And you moved here for a reason, and that by giving our kids, more opportunity to be sort of unsafe a little bit, like maybe they stumble, you got to be a little unsafe to figure out how to be safe as a kid. And this is a great place to do it. So I will conclude my talk there and open it up to our discussion.